winner is Vivien Leigh in A Streetcar Named Desire.
There is a silence that follows a great storm. It settles over the land not as an absence of sound, but as a presence of quiet. It is the sound of the world breathing again, slowly, tenderly, after the wind has torn through the trees and the lightning has illuminated, for one terrifying second, every hidden thing. To understand the life of Vivien Leigh, one must begin in that silence. One must walk through the garden of a house called Tickeridge Mill in the soft green of the English countryside, long after she has gone. The air is still thick with her, a phantom perfume of cigarettes and rain-soaked roses. Her memory is not in the grand pronouncements or the marble statues, but in the spaces she left behind, in the cool surface of a mirror that once held the most famous face in the world, and in the deep, still water of the pond at the edge of the lawn which held its reflection. The world remembers a face of impossible symmetry, a porcelain perfection that seemed not quite of this earth. It remembers eyes the colour of a cat's, shifting from green to grey to blue with the light, holding a fire that could burn through celluloid. It remembers a chin, tilted in defiance, and a voice that could cut like a diamond or tremble like a heartbroken bird. The world remembers Scarlett O'Hara, the survivor forged in the crucible of war. It remembers Blanche DuBois, the moth consumed by the naked light bulb of reality. It remembers these women because she gave them her own breath, her own blood, her own fracturing soul. But the woman herself, Vivien Mary Hartley, remains a ghost in the machine of her own fame. A whisper trapped behind the roar of the lion. She was not a creature of Hollywood's sunshine, nor of London's theatrical fog. She was born of something far older, something more elemental. A spirit forged in contrasts, in the violent beauty of extremes. Her life was a performance in 3 acts, played out under the harshest of spotlights. The first was a relentless, breathtaking ascent, a woman of iron will bending the world to her vision. The second was a reign of impossible glamour and unbearable pressure, a queen holding a court built on a fault line. And the third was a slow, heartbreaking descent, a battle waged not against directors or critics, but against the treacherous currents of her own mind, a war no one could see. The world applauded the performance, but it never truly knew the cost. It never stayed for the silence that followed. It is only here, in the quiet after the storm, that her story can truly be told. Not the legend, stamped in gold, but the life, written in invisible ink. A story of a woman who flew too close to the sun, not knowing that the sun she was flying towards was the one that burned inside her. She was born far from the damp, ancient stones of England, in a place of dizzying heights and thin, clean air. Vivien Mary Hartley came into the world in 1913 on the campus of a school in Darjeeling, British India. Below her, the world fell away into green valleys and swirling mists. Above her, the colossal, indifferent peaks of the Himalayas scraped the sky. It was a landscape of divine drama, of serene beauty and sudden violent change. A fitting overture for the life that would follow. Her father, Ernest Hartley, was a British cavalry officer, a man of comfortable means and an easy charm. Her mother, Gertrude, was a woman of devout Catholic faith and formidable resolve. She was a woman who believed in discipline, in purpose, and in the shaping of a child's destiny as if it were soft clay. In Gertrude's eyes, her daughter was a creation of exquisite potential, a gift to be polished and perfected. She saw the child's startling beauty not as a simple gift of genetics, but as a responsibility, a tool to be wielded with grace and precision in the world. From her earliest days, Vivien was steeped in an atmosphere of performance. Her mother would read her stories from Greek mythology, from Kipling, from the masters of the English language. She was taught posture, diction, and the art of holding an audience, even if that audience was just her mother in a quiet colonial drawing room. It was not about vanity, it was about excellence. Gertrude instilled in her daughter a relentless perfectionism, a belief that to be merely good was a form of failure. One must be incandescent. The idyllic, sun-drenched chapter in India was brief. At the age of 6, the world shrank to the cold grey stone of a convent school in Roehampton, England. The Convent of the Sacred Heart. After the vibrant chaos of India, it was like stepping into a silent, colourless film. The vast, snow-capped mountains were replaced by high walls. The chatter of Hindi and the scent of spices were replaced by the murmur of Latin prayers and the smell of floor polish and incense. It was here that the first true schism in her identity began. She was a solitary child in a world of rigid conformity. The other girls saw her as exotic, different. She was the one who had been born in the shadow of Mount Everest. She learned early that to survive, she had to create a self. A persona. The stage, however small, became her sanctuary. In school plays, she could be someone else. Someone bolder, someone brighter, someone who wasn't so terribly lonely. She discovered that inhabiting another character was not just an escape, it was a form of control. You could write your own lines, direct your own story. Her education continued across Europe, a finishing school tour of Paris, Italy, and Germany. She became fluent in French and Italian, absorbing the art, the culture, the romanticism of the continent. But this polished exterior concealed a growing restlessness, a yearning for a life less ordinary than the one society had prescribed for a beautiful, well-educated young woman. At 18, she returned to London, a city humming with the energy of the 1930s. It was there she met him. Leigh Holman. A barrister, 13 years her senior. He was handsome, stable, kind. He represented everything a young woman was supposed to desire: security, respectability, a handsome home in Belgravia. He was the safe harbour after a youth spent adrift. They married in 1932. She was not yet 20. Soon after, she had her first and only child, a daughter named Suzanne. On the surface, it was a perfect life. The beautiful young wife of a successful lawyer, a new mother, the mistress of an elegant home. But the costume of domesticity felt heavy, suffocating. The silence of the house during the day was not peaceful, it was deafening. The role of Mrs. Leigh Holman was the most difficult role she had ever been asked to play, because it was the one for which she felt no authentic connection. The fire within her, the one her mother had so carefully banked and cultivated, was now a dangerous, contained thing. She would stand at the window of her perfect home, looking out at the London streets, and feel a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching a play about someone else's life. The applause she craved wasn't for being a perfect hostess. She was waiting for another curtain to rise. A friend introduced her to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA. It was a lifeline. Stepping into that world of grease paint and raw emotion was not a hobby. It was a homecoming. It was here she began to shed the skin of Vivien Holman, and started to become, finally, Vivien Leigh. The decision was not a gentle drift. It was a tectonic shift. It was a quiet declaration of war against the life that had been so carefully constructed for her. To be an actress in the 1930s, for a woman of her social standing, a wife and a mother, was not just unconventional, it was faintly scandalous. It was a world of late nights, emotional exhibitionism, and dubious morality. Her husband, Leigh, a man of profound decency and conventionality, tolerated it as a phase, a charming but temporary diversion for his restless young wife. He could not comprehend that it was not a phase, it was her entire being. The resistance she faced was not just societal. In the world of the London theatre, she was met with a polite but firm wall of skepticism. She was, to put it simply, too beautiful. Her beauty was a paradox. It opened doors, but it also locked them behind her. Directors and producers saw the face, the flawless bone structure, the mesmerizing eyes, and they saw a decorative object, an ingenue, a pretty girl to be placed artfully on a set. They did not see the furnace of ambition behind the eyes. They did not hear the steely intelligence in her voice. She would later confess with a weariness that never quite left her, "People think that if you look fairly reasonable, you can't possibly act, and as I only care about acting, I think beauty can be a great handicap." She fought this perception with a ferocity that startled those around her. She was not content to be admired. She demanded to be respected. She devoured roles, worked tirelessly with voice coaches, and studied the craft with the intensity of a scholar. She was determined to prove that the face was merely the vessel for something far more complex and powerful. Then she saw him. On a London stage, in a play called Theatre Royal. Laurence Olivier. He was not just an actor, he was a force of nature, a dark, brooding, electrifying presence that seemed to command the very air around him. For Vivien, seeing him was not an inspiration, it was a recognition. She looked at him on that stage and saw her own ambition, her own passion, her own desperate need for the theatre, mirrored back at her, magnified. She turned to a friend beside her in the darkness of the theatre and whispered a prophecy, a statement of such audacious certainty that it was almost terrifying. "That," she said, "is the man I am going to marry." It was an absurd declaration. She was Mrs. Leigh Holman. He was married to the actress Jill Esmond. But in Vivien's mind, the future had already been written. The path had been illuminated. Her professional breakthrough came with a play called The Mask of Virtue in 1935. It was a frothy, stylish piece, but it put her on the map. The reviews were ecstatic, focusing to her eternal frustration on her entrancing loveliness. The influential theatre critic Sidney Carroll wrote, "Nothing more exquisite than Miss Vivien Leigh has been seen on the stage in my memory." The praise was a gilded cage, but it led to a film contract with the powerful producer Alexander Korda, and Korda, in a fateful move, cast her opposite Laurence Olivier in the 1937 film Fire over England. The chemistry that had been a premonition in a darkened theatre now became a palpable, dangerous reality. On screen, they were lovers caught in the drama of the Spanish Armada. Off-screen, they fell into an affair that was all-consuming, a fire that would illuminate their lives and eventually burn them to the ground. It was the end of her marriage to Leigh Holman, the end of Olivier's to Jill Esmond. It was the beginning of a legend. The world was about to be introduced to The Oliviers, the most glamorous, talented, and tormented couple of their generation. The resistance was over. The ascent was about to begin. The search for Scarlett O'Hara was not a casting call. It was a global phenomenon, a modern myth in the making. For 2 years, producer David O. Selznick had conducted a relentless nationwide hunt for the actress who could embody the Southern belle of Margaret Mitchell's epic Gone with the Wind. Every famous actress in Hollywood had tested for the part. Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Paulette Goddard. The role remained stubbornly, maddeningly vacant. The world waited. The press breathlessly chronicled every development. The part of Scarlett was more than a role. It was an American archetype, a woman of contradictions, vulnerable and vicious, charming and cruel, a survivor who would claw her way back from the ashes. Across the Atlantic, in London, Vivien Leigh read the novel and felt that same sense of recognition she had felt seeing Olivier on stage. She did not just want to play Scarlett O'Hara. She knew with an unshakable, almost frightening certainty that she was Scarlett O'Hara. Her obsession with the role became a singular focus. While Olivier was preparing to star in a Hollywood production of Wuthering Heights, Vivien saw her chance. She crossed the ocean, not just to be with the man she loved, but to conquer a kingdom. She arrived in Los Angeles, a relatively unknown English actress with a cut-glass accent and a will of iron, stepping into a city that ran on dreams and self-promotion. She was an outsider, a long shot, but she had an ally. Myron Selznick, David's brother and a powerful agent who had taken her on. The moment of her arrival into legend is itself a scene worthy of the film. On a chilly December night in 1938, David O. Selznick was filming one of the movie's most iconic and dangerous scenes, the burning of the Atlanta depot. The set, a vast collection of old studio facades, was ablaze, great gouts of orange flame licking at the night sky. Selznick stood watching the inferno, silhouetted against the fire, still without his Scarlett. Myron approached him, a small, elegant figure in tow. "David," he said over the roar of the fire, "I want you to meet Scarlett O'Hara." And there she was. Vivien. The firelight danced in her astonishing eyes, catching the green and gold flecks. The smoke and chaos framed her perfect, determined face. In that instant, against the backdrop of a burning city, Selznick saw it. The beauty, yes, but also the defiance. The chin tilted just so. The unwavering gaze that seemed to say, "I can survive this." The search was over. The part was hers, but winning the role was only the first battle. The war was in playing it. The production of Gone with the Wind was a grueling 17-week marathon of physical and emotional endurance. She worked relentlessly, often 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. She was isolated, a stranger in a strange land, surrounded by a cast and crew who were initially skeptical of this foreign interloper who had stolen America's most coveted role. She missed Olivier, who was in New York, with an ache that was physical. Their love, the very thing that had propelled her here, was now a source of profound loneliness. She poured all of that longing, that frustration, that fierce determination into Scarlett. When Scarlett scraped and fought for Tara, it was Vivien fighting for her own legitimacy. When Scarlett wept for Ashley Wilkes, it was Vivien weeping for her absent Larry. She did not simply act the part, she transfused her own lifeblood into it. The director, George Cukor, was fired early on, replaced by the notoriously tough Victor Fleming. Fleming clashed with Vivien, often telling her to just cram the script and do it. But she would not be bullied. She would retreat to her dressing room with the novel, rereading passages, ensuring that every gesture, every intonation was true not just to the script, but to the soul of the character Mitchell had created. She was protecting Scarlett from the very machine that was creating her. When the film premiered in Atlanta in December 1939, the world was not prepared. Vivien Leigh was no longer an actress. She was a global icon. Her face was everywhere. Her performance was a revelation. She had captured every facet of Scarlett's complex soul, the petulance, the courage, the vulnerability, the ruthlessness. It was one of the most indelible performances ever committed to film. In 1940, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Standing at the podium, a delicate figure in a floral dress, she seemed the picture of grace and gratitude. But the Oscar was more than a validation. It was a brand. It had seared the image of Scarlett O'Hara onto her own identity. For the rest of her life, people would look at her and see the fiery survivor from Tara. They saw the strength, the resilience, the indomitable will. They did not see the cost. They did not see that in the fire of that performance, the first deep hairline fracture had appeared in the porcelain of her own soul. The victory was absolute, but it created a new kind of prison. The world now saw her as Scarlett, the embodiment of unbreakable strength. But Vivien was not made of steel. She was made of something far more fragile, more volatile. She was a woman of breathtaking highs and devastating lows, a condition that was then poorly understood, labeled simply as manic depression. Today, we would call it bipolar disorder. It was a storm that gathered within her, a force of nature that no amount of willpower could control. The years that followed her Oscar win were a frantic attempt to build a life that could contain this storm. She and Olivier, finally free to marry after their respective divorces were finalized, became the undisputed royalty of the stage and screen.